So the context and background. The context is that several years ago in 2022, I had recently joined the Global Development Institute, been with them for 2 years, and I wanted to understand what did people in the development sector want from lifelong learning. So we interviewed 42 people across 20 countries and organizations to understand what are the challenges. And what came out quite strongly is that people find working in the development space very rewarding, but very challenging. And one of the key things is that people were burning out and losing staff members because people were just burnt out. And so resilience came out as a key theme because the international development sector is hard. It has got increasingly hard because of funding challenges, USAID funding disappearing, governments cutting back on funding to development. So we recognize that there is a major challenge for people to remain resilient in this world. We also, the research showed that we need flexible learning. People cannot continue to take time off from work and go and do long courses. So they want short courses. They would like them to be available online. And so we decided to develop out of that research a micro-credential in resilience. I spent quite a bit of time researching what is resilience, and I'll be sharing that with you, and then also looking at future trends. So this comes out of a born need from people, not just something that we think should be done. People are really saying, I want it. So this diagram that I'm sharing now shows some of the things that we found in the very first study in 2022. We found that people who work in development, we called them healers of an aching world. So they want to make a difference. They want to heal. They want to make the world a better place. And the world is aching. And what that does, I'll just jump to number 5 here, is that humanity demands our own awareness and action. So if we have social injustice, we have poverty, we have water shortages, we have real dark, wicked problems, what does that mean for the person working there? It means that that person needs to be deeply self-aware, and some of the things that they need are intercultural skills. They need to manage stakeholder relationships, work in teams, but they need to be embedded in a sense of themselves and self-awareness. And this is where resilience starts and sits there. Also, we did say that if people said, if you're going to help with teaching, we wanted to have all these kind of concepts. We want to have reflection. We want to bring ourselves in. So based on this, we designed the micro-credential and our connected resilience program. And we talk about connected resilience because resilience has often had its roots in different places. So if we start on the left-hand side and we see personal resilience, many psychologists have written about well-being, and there's a strong psychological basis for resilience. But then we have another school of thought coming in from organizations, consultants who have looked at how do we make organizations more resilient. Let's look at their organizational culture, their communication, etc. And then we have people who come through with a lens of community and societal resilience. And very often we find that in issues like climate resilience. Let's look at the climate, let's look at disaster resilience. And these schools of thought have been quite separated, and there's a lot of knowledge in each of those areas, but the knowledge doesn't relate, it doesn't connect. And so the drawing that we have here, kindly produced by my colleague Skylar Bailey, shows a flower in a pot. And imagine you are the individual, you are the flower in the pot, and you are doing well and you are thriving. But then suddenly things go wrong and you start to not thrive so much. And very often what happens, people look at the flower. Oh, what's wrong with you? What can you do to improve? And what we're saying is the flower is sitting in soil. and it's sitting in a pot, in a context. And that pot that soil could be your team that you're working in or your organization. And your organization could be very, very toxic. And so if your soil is bad, you could not thrive. You could not be resilient. But even let's make the assumption that your organization is great and you're thriving. There are events outside of that that could be impacting on you, such as war, such as the climate, such as economic hardship, such as just the realities of life, illness, death of close one, and all of those environmental and social things could be impacting. So we have to look at the interrelationship and the connectedness between each of these components. And when we look at those, then we get connected resilience. So today we're going to focus on personal resilience, but we want you to continually remember that that is only one of the parts. And they're all the components: individuals, groups, teams, organizations, societies, and global connections. So we are only focusing on the individual today. Out of the microcredential, the program ran for 40 hours, 8 weeks, 5 hours per week. And very briefly, this is kind of the things we discussed in personal resilience. We then had 8 weeks on organizational and team resilience, another 40 hours. And we then had 8 weeks on community and society resilience. So those were a total of 24 weeks. So just a reminder of how they all connect. They all interfeed across with one another. Personal resilience will affect team resilience, will affect community. Community will affect personal. So very briefly, who attended our program? We had most people attending with postgraduate qualifications. So just indicates that we need lifelong learning. We want learning for people who are who've already got a master's or who have got extensive work experience. And so we need to recognize that we need to continually learn. We had people coming from 22 countries. Africa had the largest, 38%, and most of the people were from the development or humanitarian sector. So that's a little bit of context how this came into being. But what is resilience? Resilience is ultimately the ability to cope effectively with stress, challenges, and there are two components: bouncing back and bouncing forward. Now, historically, and even in some of the contemporary theories like disaster resilience, people are saying things like we need to prepare, react, and recover. And that's their resilience framework. And if we only go to recover, we're not truly being resilient. We need to bounce forward beyond that. We need to be able to thrive. And so if you come down to the last bullet point, it's about adaptability, to change, adapt, and reorganize in response to shifting circumstances. But the ultimate component of resilience is adaptability. So if you are just recovering, you are not truly resilient. You've just got part of the way there. And resilience is also not grit or hardiness. So some people are absolutely amazing. They persevere and they persevere and persevere. It reminds me, my daughter, when she was about 10 years old, got a certificate at school. She came home and she said, Mom, I got a certificate for perseverance. So she says, I might never achieve anything, but I keep going. And virtually that is the definition of grit. Grit is you don't adapt. I just keep doing the same thing and I go down the same path. And sometimes we do need grit when we want to be resilient, but it is not grit alone that will get us there. We need to stop, reflect, and adapt. Now, hardiness is characterized by three attitudes that people do when they face stress. I am going to control this. I will be able to influence things. The second one is commitment. I'm going to be engaged. I will make it happen. And the third one is I see challenge as a norm. Now, this hardiness is a good attitude. It's a kind of can-do attitude. But sometimes a can-do attitude still results in not being able to do things because you can't always control or influence certain things. So how do you, if you just have grit and just have hardiness, you are unable to adapt. So you can use these, but please remember the role is about adaptation. So I'm going to look now at personal resilience, but before I go into looking at personal resilience, I'd like you to take a few seconds to think about where you are most resilient in your life. What helps you? What is the things that help you become resilient? And that is adapt and bounce forward and thrive. What helps you? And then I'd like you to think about what hinders you, what sets you back. And then as we go through the topics today, it'd be very useful for you to see which of the ones came up, or if something didn't come up, I'd love to hear that as well. So the framework that I've got here, the personal resilience framework, is based on 4 components. And these components are listed on the left side. Firstly, we need to be physically resilient. If we're not physically resilient, we cannot be emotionally and cognitively and socially resilient. Then we need to be emotionally resilient and spiritually, and that by spiritually, it might be religion for some people and their faith, but it might also just be the place where you make meaning. We need to be cognitive, use our mind, and we need to be social. So those are the 4 things that we need to do to be resilient. And in the original research, they were in a lot of academic jargon. And I decided to try and take them out of the academic jargon and just make them into words that we really use. I'm busy doing research in the next 6 months. I'm going on sabbatical to look at this framework, and it's emerging and evolving. So under physical, I wrote sleep, eat, move. And I thought it looks like a little bit of a pun for those of you who read the book. I think it was called Eat, Sleep, and Pray. But it wasn't intended to be. I was just going through those things. So I'm going to go through these 12 areas and look at those. And because of the time factor, I've chosen to focus on 1 or 2 key concepts under those 12 areas. So hopefully I'm not going deep into any of them, but I'm touching on all of them. And hopefully the ones that resonate for you will work for you. So question, sleep. Over what percentage, do you think people sleep for less than 5 hours a night on average? How many people sleep for less than 5 hours a night on average? So you can just think of that, or if you want to, you can type it in the chat. And then the second one is, in the UK, how many percentage of adults do not have the recommended 7 to 9 hours sleep a night? If we are having less than 5 nights sleep on average, 5 hours a night, they consider that dangerous, very, very dangerous. So we need to be aware of how dangerous. And that varies slightly, but it looks as though it's on average 17%. That's almost 20%, which means 1/5 of the population are in a danger zone of not having sufficient sleep. And then how many adults, UK adults, do not have 7 hours? 71%. So it means almost 2/3 of our population are not, I mean, it is 2/3 of the population or more, are not having the recommended 7 to 8, 9 hours sleep a night. Only that means 30% of our population is sleeping well. So why does this matter? And for those who do sleep well, great. But what does it really mean? There is more and more research out all the time that if we do not sleep, it is a precursor to many physical problems. And you can see some of those things that I identified there. People who are obese and try and lose weight, if they are having less than 7 hours sleep, their bodies won't let them lose weight because we need things to happen while we're sleeping in order for that to go. Brain fog, people are talking about, oh, my head's not clear, my head's not clear. Um, Much of that is due to the quality of sleep because we get different types of sleep. So if we don't get good quality sleep, we're also going to have a challenge. Um, Alzheimer's. More and more research is showing that people who particularly develop early onset Alzheimer's have had poor quality sleep for more than 20 years. So we need to be aware of that, as well as dementia. There's a link. Depression, anxiety. Uh, these are just some of the things that people say. But then there are work-related problems. We struggle to concentrate. And when we are tired, we have interpersonal problems. I'm irritable. I'm not objective. I take things personally. Um, if you have pain, the ability to manage pain is harder when you're not sleeping. You can't make good decisions. Your reaction time is there, and it shortens our lifespan. So there are many reasons why sleep is such an important foundational aspect to resilience. You'll see I've linked some resources to the slides, and the slide that the person I put down there is Matthew Walker. Matthew Walker has many podcasts on sleep. He is known as the sleep guru, and I listened to one of his more recent podcasts last month in June, and he has a lot of information. I think he's got a series of about 10 podcasts, and he's written many peer-reviewed articles. But he said last month in June 2025, the most important thing that you can do, if you can't do anything else, is regularity. Go to bed at the same time every night and wake up at the same time. They found that that alone in their research is the thing that has the biggest impact. There's a lot of other things. He talks about how to get quality sleep, get your REM sleep, how to ensure you get the quantity, the number of hours. But he says the routine has found to be the biggest thing. And it actually stimulates our growth hormone and cortisol regulation, which helps us cope. So sleep is really important. If you're not sleeping well, start to research Matthew's work. Also look at Andrew Huberman's work from the Huberman Lab. Secondly, eat. Now, there's so much we could discuss under eating, and there are many different views of what we should and shouldn't eat. But the key thing is that there is an ongoing research between our gut health and our mental health and our well-being and our brain function. So if we want to be resilient, we need to be able to be mentally well, physically well, and cognitively well. And the one key piece of research is the role of mitochondria in our bodies. And the mitochondria produce energy and they influence stress. Now, if our mitochondria are not working well, we have less energy, we feel overwhelmed, we're less effective. They also, the mitochondria control inflammation. So if you have aching bodies, if you have autoimmune diseases that could have been precipitated by inflammation. So the role of mitochondria is really important. And what we need to look at is we need to monitor what we're eating and adapt our nutrition. And we had 5 hours of a workshop there, which was also helped develop by my colleague Epiphania Kamara. And we looked at the role of nutrition. But the key aspects are the role of sugar, gluten, and alcohol. And we need to be aware of these factors. I have always been somebody who enjoyed a glass of wine or two every night. And I've always been somebody who struggled with sleeping. And I did more and more research on the role of alcohol and the relation to sleep, and then subsequently to the relation to the mitochondria. And I have cut back on my alcohol. I may have some alcohol at social functions when I see people, but I no longer have it nightly. And that has made a big impact on my sleep. That's just a little small personal story. But sugar is seen as one of the worst things to break down our system, and also a lot in terms of gluten. And these lead to things like glucose spikes, and these have nothing to do with being diabetic. This happens to anybody who eats a lot of sugar or a lot of wheat. And so take responsibility to look at your diet. I'm not going to go and advocate any particular diet or any way of eating. There's a lot of debate about plant-based food, about proteins. I do personally think there's a good resource called the Glucose Goddess on Instagram. And the reason why I like the Glucose Goddess is because all her articles are based on scientific evidence and research. So whatever she says, she will have the article to back it up. So that's one option, but do research and then adapt your nutrition. Realize that what you're putting into your body is coming out in a different way. Then physically, we need to move. And again, there's a strong link. People always know about movement and the role of movement in being fit and, muscle tone, but the link between movement and brain health. And the reason is that exercise triggers our hippocampus in our brain, and that is really good. The hippocampus can actually adapt and grow. And so it's one of the neural paths that grows new neurons very quickly. And the more you move, the better it is for your mental health, for your memory, for mood. And also, again, there's a strong piece of research where you can get, if you don't move, there's a decreased cognitive decline. They have found that if you walk 3 times a week for 20 minutes, it will reduce the risk of dementia by 30%. So these are motivators over and above becoming more resilient. So we need to focus our focus on physical activity, but it also improves our focus. So the more physical activity we do. Now, some people do very little physical activity, and the research has shown that to do 5 minutes every hour over a sort of 8-hour day is as impactful on our mental health as if we went for an hour's workout after work to the gym. Now, the gym might build your muscles more, might build some cardio fitness, but if you don't move, and you sit at your computer all day, it will actually start to impact your mood and your ability to recall. So we recommend movement and using movement and adapting constantly what we're doing. There was a experiment where they asked people to reduce their activity count, and they monitored them. And 88% said they felt more depressed and lost meaning in life. And I'm coming to the part where we look at the role of purpose and meaning in resilience. So remember, by exercising, you're actually changing your brain chemistry and you're increasing your brain plasticity. And the plasticity means more neural paths are firing, and it actually can act as an antidepressant. So movement is something that you can do. And again, I've put down 2 resources there. These are not the only 2, but I've just tried to make it short and simple for the webinar. So we've looked at the physical. Now we look at the emotional and spiritual. And the first part of emotional and spiritual is you need to feel. And this sounds funny. What do you mean I must feel? Well, people are starting to numb their emotions. And there's a quote that I want to read from Brene Brown, We sometimes have so much pain, so much hurt, so much anger, so we numb those emotions. But you can't numb hard feelings without numbing other effects. So you cannot selectively numb. So when you numb those hard, difficult emotions, I'm sad, I'm grieving, I'm angry, we numb joy, we numb gratitude, we numb happiness. And then we become miserable because we're feeling numb. And then we start to look for purpose and meaning. And we feel vulnerable because I'm just so numb. So now what will help me? Well, let me have a couple of beers or let me have a muffin. And it becomes a dangerous cycle that we go through. Also, the role of multitasking, continually looking at technology. Let me look at my phone. Let's look at an email. Let's have a conversation. Let's go here. As we multitask, it also has an impact of numbing the brain in terms of focus and centeredness and feelings. So when I say to people, feel, it's because we stop feeling. It's because we're suppressing our feelings. And so many people have come to me in the coaching space and said, I'm tired, I'm weary, I'm exhausted. And those are the words. And when you ask them about any other feeling, it's only those words. So the less we feel, the more exhausted we get. So we have to start being able to feel those good and those bad emotions. But we need a psychological safe space where we can feel those emotions. We also need to hope. Hope is an emotion. It's also some other things, but not, but it's ultimately a positive expectation of a valued, desired future. It helps us believe something is possible. And when I get to the cognitive component of resilience, we'll see that hope um, links to what happens in our minds as well. So we have to have dreams. We have to want to do things. And one of the things that helps with hope is hearing and sharing successful stories, connecting with people who have achieved things. So we need to make sure, are we getting outside ourselves? Are we finding the stories where things did happen? In the microcredential, we asked people to go and find examples of successful community interventions. And they came back with the most inspirational stories that they found. And I'm creating a consolidation of those links and stories for us to be able to read where things are really working. Because if we watch mainstream news, we hear where things are not working. And I'm not saying we become naive and we are blind to the things that are not working, but they are overwhelming us. And there is research to show that if you get one negative message, to get back to an equilibrium, you need three positive messages. And this is linked to neuroscience because our brains retain that. Just think of yourselves when you were at school and you did badly in an exam or a test or at university. You remember the bad result. You don't remember, the results where you kind of got good marks and grades for a paper. We come back, you had something bad happen to you at work, you go home, and you might have had 7 hours of good stuff and you had one traumatic meeting. We talk about the one traumatic meeting. So we need to look at giving attention to hope, to dreaming, to believing, to seeing the future that could be there and sharing it with others. Snyder in 2010 is the sort of original researcher who gave us a strong foundational knowledge in hope. And he says there's three components to hope. And the first component is agency. I believe I can do something to make a difference in this area. So you have to own that it's possible. Maybe I can only mentor one young student, but I can make a difference to that student. So you're hopeful and you believe you can influence. The second is you have a clear goal of what you want. And the third is you have a pathway, and you may have different pathways. So if I have hope that I can influence young people, I could say I could do it through webinars, I could do it through writing a book, I could do it through having face-to-face sessions, I could have different pathways of getting there. So when you have your goal, don't just see it as having one pathway, but see it as having many pathways to get there, and that will help sustain hope. The next one is I want to talk about spiritual or making meaning. And how do we make meaning? The picture there is of paint, and how do we make a picture of our lives? How do we take the different paints and textures and things happening in our lives? It's a process. So the very first thing about making meaning is we have to understand something. So, for example, I could say, I am shy. It doesn't matter what you say, but what was something about yourself. I am this. I talk too much. I'm an extrovert. I'm an introvert. It doesn't matter what you say, but understand something about yourself. Then understand your context. I lead an organization. I work in an academic institution. I work in a large international NGO. Then match your insight with your second insight, your insight of yourself with your insight of the context. And then you make meaning. So what does it mean to be shy as a leader? Well, it means a much better one-on-one. I don't like large groups. I'm not so spontaneous in talking. And what does that mean? It means I have to lead through smaller relationships rather than a big dynamic talk. And then align your meaning to your goal. So if I'm going to influence people one-on-one more than in a big group and talk, what am I going to be trying to influence them? And then, oh, there's a typo there, then change the behavior. Behavior follows understanding. So this is really important. Okay, so we've now looked at the physical, and we looked at the emotional and spiritual. Oh, just also to say, under spiritual, you can also find meaning in faith, and you can find meaning there as well, which would be really important. But it's first understand, this is what I believe, this is the context I'm in, how do I match the two? And then in the cognitive one, I want you to reflect. And I'm going to start off with a little personal story, and I want you to perhaps think of this. That phrase there is to thine own self be true, comes from Shakespeare, but it was something my mother always used to say to me. She used to say to me, to thine own self be true. And when my mother passed, I thought, this is what I remember my mother saying to me. And I thought, I wonder what my own children would remember me saying. And I thought I said many profound things. I thought I said, we have a choice. You can choose to be positive, make a difference. I thought I had a lot of profound things. And I went to ask my children. But I wonder, what do you think your wives, partners, family, children, parents would say about yourself? So reflecting. So I'll tell you what my children said. They were about 4 and 8 at the time. And I said, oh, Granny's just died. She used to say this. What would you say if Mummy died? What would you remember Mummy saying? And my 8-year-old said, oh, it's 6 p.m. It's wine o'clock. Remember I told you I used to like my glass of wine every evening? And then my 4-year-old said she'd remember Mummy saying, oh, I'm so tired. So I thought, wow, a tired alcoholic. Um, but it made me think, what am I saying to people? What am I projecting? So we need to reflect. How are we coming across? And there's two parts of reflection. The one part is what I intend, and the other part is what is the impact. So I may say to you, please be on time. My intention was to manage my anxiety and make sure everything was organized. The impact may come across that I'm trying to control your behavior and don't trust you. So we need to reflect, how am I coming across? What is my intention? What is my impact? Who am I? Am I an introvert? Am I an extrovert? This is just one example. And Alan Grant says personality becomes like an anchor. You can drift away from the anchor, but not too far. It is anchoring you. Personality matters, but your ability to adapt matters more. Who you become is not about the personality traits you have, it's what you decide to do with them. So when you know yourself, you should be playing to your strengths and working out, can I do this in the best possible way? So secondly, in the cognitive one, we need to reframe. And there's neuroplasticity and attention. And just the neuroplasticity is where we give attention to, it actually changes the way our brain functions. So the more I give attention to something, the more I will think that. So if I always look at the negative things of what could go wrong, I get hardwired to look at the failings. If I want to look at what could go right, I have to constantly give attention to what could go right. So I have to wire myself. So I'm very briefly covering some neuroscience principles in 1 minute, because I aim to finish in the next 5, and then allow some time for questions. So the neuroscience, we get triggered, and the triggers can be different things. But when we get triggered, we have what we call the 3 Fs, which is I freeze, I flight, or freeze, flight, and I've gone blank on my 3 Fs. Um, okay, it'll come to me in a moment. So it's appease. So what happens just in the old days, if you had a lion coming to attack you, you could freeze and just stand still and not move from the lion, or you could fight and kill the lion, fight, or you could flight and run away from the lion. These days, the trigger is not a lion. It is a demanding deadline, a difficult situation in the office, a personal situation. And you can't fight physically with your line manager. You can't kill them like you might have killed the lion. You can't run away from the job. And so very often we go into freeze. And then the new one is appease, where we just go kind of, yeah, okay, fine. And it's just a token gesture where you sort of placating someone. But when we get triggered, those responses happen. They trigger our amygdala, and you don't need to remember all these terms, but it's a part of the brain that is not logical. It is just an emotive part of the brain. And we need to move and slow down and get into our prefrontal cortex up here, which is the logical part. When we're in our amygdala, we do things like have road rage in cars, when people get aggressive and get out their car and start screaming at somebody. That's the amygdala. When we slow down, take deep breaths, we move into our prefrontal cortex. So we need to just stop, reframe. The PNS and the SNS is the parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. The parasympathetic nervous system is the feel-good one. And that's where we feel positive, we feel focused, we feel calm. And how do we get there? Well, PEA and NEA. PEA is positive emotional attractors, and NEA is negative ones. We need to have positive emotional attractors. So when you get triggered, you have to slow down, you have to breathe, you have to get into the parasympathetic nervous system. And one of the things that will get us into the parasympathetic nervous system is this next point, vision. When we have a clear vision and a clear goal and growth mindset, we are able to get our physiology in alignment. This resource there, Richard Boyakis, has written a new book, just come out now, about 6 months ago, and it's called The Science of Change. And in that book, he quotes, if you want to build a ship, don't herd people together to collect wood and assign them tasks. Rather, teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. We need visions, not little tasks that we're going to go through. So really important to look at the role of vision. And Richard Boyakis states that he believes it's the greatest factor. So getting to the last section, social support. And there we need to be able to connect with others. We are, no man is an island. We are not able to be resilient alone. So we need to make sure that we coach, we mentor, um, and we work in communities of practice. Support. We also, what influences our support? How well are we satisfied in that relationship? How much trust do we have? How much meaning does that person give us? Does it facilitate identity? So sometimes I will be with people and I feel like these people are my tribe because they care about the global development community. I really resonate with them because I care about that. So what is it? Does it evoke a feeling in you? Do you feel belonging? Do you feel a sense of social recognition? So it's not just about being supportive, it's about making sure that you supported it with the right people and in the right relationships. And then we need to interact with others and learn from them and from their stories, because we can learn from other people's stories. So we need to connect. And lastly, we need to belong. We need to have positive relationships in order to flourish. This is social well-being. We need to feel included and we need to feel that they add value. So to conclude, there is our personal resilience model. That's what I've gone through today, the key things. And I'm now going to be open to questions on any of those areas or comments if you don't have any questions. But just to end with a quote, "You're not what happened to you, you're what you choose to become." So thank you.